Send us a Tom Beers, please, God. The identity of Tom Beers is unknown to me. I have no idea who Tom Beers is. In Storage Wars, not every treasure was discovered in a locker. The people themselves were some of the true treasures. They made every episode feel like something you couldn't turn away from, and they debated, laughed, and took chances. It's not because they stopped bidding, though, if you've noticed some faces absent recently. Unfortunately, when no one was looking, life dragged them away. However, whose names evoked the most profound silence? Furthermore, why does it still feel as though they were only here yesterday? 10 cherished Storage Wars members sadly lost their lives. G. Dave Hester, number 10. What if a television program is about more than just drama and fun? What if all of the yelling, bidding, and laughter are concealing something darker? There is a lot of discussion regarding storage conflicts like that. Fans who have been watching the show for years have begun to notice an oddity. These days, it goes beyond who makes the most money or who discovers the nicest items in the lockers. The plot revolves around how some of the actors became ill, in agony, or even in danger of dying. People from the event began experiencing severe issues one by one. A few nearly died, some became really ill, and yet others had mishaps. At that point, viewers began to conjecture that the show was cursed. Dave Hester was more than just a Storage Wars character. With his well-known youp, he was one of the primary stars, and most likely the show's loudest voice. He was always able to retain everyone's attention, play fiercely, and win. The majority of reality show viewers anticipate the drama that Dave brought to the program. However, he asserted in 2012 that the show was fraudulent. He claimed that the goal of the locker's contents was to add excitement to the performance. He didn't stop there either. He filed a legal lawsuit and appeared in court. That did not sit well with the network. They removed him from the show as a result. After the entire ordeal, most individuals would have chosen to keep silent, but Dave stood by his assertions. Andy returned him. Perhaps they recognized his significance to the show, or perhaps they believed that his words would be forgotten. In any event, Dave came back, but his life would never be the same. Soon after his return, Dave had to deal with something far more serious than legal issues. He suffered a hemorrhagic stroke, meaning that his brain was bleeding. This occurred as a result of sleep apnea and high blood pressure, two conditions that many people have but don't often take seriously. He almost died from the stroke. He was lying in a hospital bed, unable to move or speak, 1 minute on TV. The doctors weren't convinced he would survive at that time. However, Dave managed to survive. Fans were sincerely pleased to see him alive and making an effort to move on. But many began to wonder why episodes like this continued to happen to characters. It wasn't only Dave's narrative. Strange issues also started to affect other cast members. Some experienced health scares, while others were in strange accidents. This was meant to be a program about individuals discovering lost treasures, but instead, the cast keeps getting into trouble, which makes you question if there's something weird actually happening behind the scenes of Storage Wars, and who might be the next to suffer. Mark Blow is number 9. One early Monday morning, Mark Blow, who gained notoriety from the television program Storage Wars, was discovered inside his vehicle. Unfortunately, he had passed away. His vehicle was parked in the garage of Ballo, Incorporated, his Simi Valley, California-based company. When the authorities got there, they verified that he had died from inhaling exhaust fumes and carbon monoxide. He was just 40 years old, and although the facts were hard to believe, all the evidence suggested that he had committed himself. Because of his demeanor as well as his work, Mark had always been a TV personality that distinguished out. His nickname, Rico Suave, which reflected his attire and demeanor during the auctions, will stick in the minds of Storage Wars viewers. He frequently arrived with piles of cash and ostentatious attire, prepared to outbid anyone he believed had something precious stashed away in a storage locker. However, things might have been different behind the scenes. Mark had been arrested at his auction business for possession of methamphetamines and for being under the influence of alcohol just 2 days prior to his discovery. Since he already had a court date scheduled for February 19th, he was already facing significant legal issues, which probably made everything feel more burdensome than he could bear. Bleo was able to escape the scenario without suffering any severe consequences, although it appeared to have a detrimental effect on his mental health. This was so burdensome that he felt psychologically unstable and asked his fiancée, Elizabeth Metzis, to be with him at his office at that period. After the visit, Elizabeth thought he was feeling better and left. Regretfully, his body was discovered the following day. Mark was more than a television personality. Although he was born in Portugal, he was raised in Brazil until he was around 14. He started constructing his life from the ground up after coming to the United States. He had a video gaming store named Gaming Exchange before he ever gained notoriety. He entered the realm of purchasing and selling misplaced or abandoned goods when he started his auction house later in 2011. Mark gained notoriety in 2011 for assisting in the repatriation of an extremely rare comic book to actor Nicolas Cage. In 1938, the comic was Action Comics, one the first edition to feature Superman. After being taken from Cage's house, that comic had been lost for almost a decade. While sorting through the stuff in a storage container he had bought, Mark came across it. Furthermore, the comic's nearly $1 million value was not the only topic of conversation when the reality about what he had found was revealed. The fact that he insured the comic returned to its original owner impressed many, and ever since, his name has been associated with that story. However, all of those tales are now recalled with regret. Because, in reality, no matter how self-assured or happy someone appears to be in public, nobody truly understands what they are going through on the inside. Officers discovered Mark inside his vehicle when they got there. Additionally, he was no longer breathing despite the fact that rescue had been called. Asphyxia from inhaling the vapors was declared as the official reason of his death. Gunter Nyota is number 8. In addition to bringing warmth, humor, and sincere goodness to the screen, the Storage Wars family lost a member. After facing severe health issues brought on by lung cancer, Gunter Nyota, who had been a part of the show since its 4th season, died at the age of 67. In an emotional video he published on social media, his son Rene, who many fans also knew from the show, delivered the devastating news. He clarified that there was nothing that physicians could do because his father's condition had gotten so bad. Rene talked candidly about everything, revealing that Gunter had been diagnosed with lung cancer approximately 6 months prior. He claimed that although his father had stopped smoking for a while, the harm had already been done because he had smoked for about 30 years. Rene clarified in the video that his father's body was no longer able to cope with the holes in his lungs. In Salt Lake City, Utah, Gunter's youngest son, Ricky, was present when he passed away in his sleep while in the hospital. According to Rene, he decided to make this announcement in public because so many people had come to adore his father over the years. Gunter was one of the few people on TV who didn't receive animosity or hostility from the audience. Fans eagerly anticipated seeing him on film, and everyone on set enjoyed working with him. Renee continued by saying that they had kept his father's sickness a secret, since they genuinely thought he would recover, and thanked everyone for the warm words. This was not how they expected things to finish. A few years after Renee and his wife Casey had established themselves as the bargain hunters operating their thrift store in Pay, California, Gunter had joined the program. After joining his son in season 8, Gunter quickly gained popularity among viewers. Gunter described himself as an enthusiastic bassist and photographer. He performed alongside Pat Travers, Leslie West, and Michael Shanker over the years. Additionally, Gunter starred in a few films, such as The Haunting of Death Valley Junction and Do Not Disturb. Born in Austria, he established a life for himself and his family in Las Vegas after relocating there in 1990. Gunter had recently gone to Utah for emergency surgery, according to sources. Furthermore, his disease had progressed too far, despite his family's expectation that things would improve. The fact that Gunter had only recently begun to play a larger role in the program makes this even more difficult for fans. His time on Storage Wars may have been short in comparison to others, but the way he impacted people's hearts created a lasting impression, and people were growing to know him better. Mo Prigo, number 7. People watched Mo Prigo on Storage Wars for years. Texas, wearing things no one else would dare wear, bidding on neglected lockers, and making jokes as though nothing could ever frighten him. But there was so much more to this man than that. He practiced medicine. He collected things. He was a businessman. He had a family, too. He now understood them. Morris Mo Preg. He looked for unusual artwork, odd furniture, and anything with a backstory for more than 30 years. He then opened his business, which he named River Regency Modern, after 10 years of selling his creations all throughout Dallas. Most people wouldn't notice the details that Mo did, and while balancing his job as a podiatrist, he was able to keep the business operating with the assistance of Robert, his youthful store manager. However, how could someone like Mo, who was always vivacious and stylish, accomplish all of this while also becoming as one of the most recognizable faces at auctions on television? He frequently teamed up with Mary Patillon, and the two of them were an excellent combination. Mo remained in Texas, where his medical profession remained his primary emphasis, while Mary later moved on to the main show in California. He remained on the show for all 3 seasons, and the others referred to him as the Doctor. But then, who was him when the cameras stopped rolling? Mo managed more than only his shop and his clinic. In addition, he enjoyed teaching, swimming, basketball, gardening, music, and art. No matter where he traveled, he made sure to make his imprint, because he loved to travel and was happy when things had purpose. In everything he spoke about his wife, Michaela, whom he referred to as his wife for life. His devotion was evident. She was the one who supported him through his health issues and remained by his side during his latter years of marriage, which lasted 19 years. Unfortunately, when he became ill, this trend abruptly stopped. Despite continuing to live as long as he could, he died on March 4, 2021, after battling the sickness for 6 years. Mo injected vitality to an industry that most people only saw dust and broken things. Therefore, he was more than just a TV show cast member. The 6th is Brandon Sheets. On Storage Wars, Brandon Sheets was well known for standing by his father, Daryl, and the two formed a formidable team. However, When Brandon was fired from the show in 2017, everything abruptly changed. According to the creators, this was because of decreased funding. However, his father remained, so Brandon had to decide what to do. He consequently experimented with a variety of occupations, including real estate sales, before a terrible incident that nearly lost him his life occurred one day. He was employed as a truck driver for UPS, which appeared like just another job. In early 2022, Brandon posted a picture of the collision vehicle and an explanation of what transpired that evening on Instagram. He clarified that someone else was filling in because he had been dozing off in the rear of the UPS semi-trailer, and his buddy wasn't there that day. This co-driver struck another truck at 70 mph while Brandon was asleep. According to Brandon, waking up was like a bomb going off and everything was in disarray. After being taken to a hospital in Texas, he was returned to his home state of Arizona to begin his recovery. He returned in season 13 after a brief hiatus during a gap in the show and continued through seasons 14 and 15. Fans, however, pointed out that Daryl was not included in the new cast when season 16 was revealed for June 7, 2025. During this time, some people on the internet began spreading untrue reports that he had died, although his social media accounts indicated that he was still alive. Furthermore, in 2023, he opened a company in Havasu, Arizona, called Show Me Your Junk. However, Daryl was admitted to the hospital in 2019 due to a serious medical issue. He claimed to have been ill for 3 months at the time. In addition, he later suffered a small heart attack. He said that physicians told him he had congestive heart failure and a very dangerous condition in one of his lungs, in a message that he later removed. Dealing with everything at once was a lot. It was much more terrifying because he hadn't anticipated it, and it had been building for months. After requiring surgery, he reported that his heart function had returned to 40% a month later, which indicated that it was becoming more powerful. Not everything was okay at the moment, but it also meant he could remove the defibrillator vest he had to wear following the cardiac scare. Daryl said his heart was still not fully functioning, so he wasn't entirely safe yet. But he had faith that things would improve in due time. The fifth is Dan Dodson. Long before Storage Wars, Dan Dodson had established a solid reputation in the auction industry. After learning the ins and outs of auctions, he founded American Auctioneers. His wife Laura soon joined him in business, and the two of them became one of the most well-known couples on the show. Dan and Laura were frequently spotted together conducting auctions and entertaining the crowd, much like Jared and Brandy. Before a horrible incident in 2014 that had the potential to permanently alter everything. Everything appeared to be going smoothly. It began as a typical day. However, Dan began to feel ill. Laura knew right away that something was seriously amiss when he began to mix up his sentences and complain of a terrible headache. When she glanced at him, she saw that his legs were giving out beneath him, his eyes had rolled back, and his skin had changed from red and purple to a frightening shade of blue-green. She called for assistance as soon as she realized this and remained by his side as things rapidly deteriorated. Dan was experiencing more than a headache or an isolated episode of fainting. Two brain aneurysms were occurring simultaneously. Something like that doesn't work out for most people, and although it briefly appeared like Dan might not make it, he did. He made it, according to doctors, in part because there wasn't much blood within his head at the time, which improved their chances of curing him. Dr. M. Asataki, his neurologist, clarified that while it was uncommon, Dan's survival of such a severe condition was not impossible. After he stabilized, Dan spent some time in the hospital, and Laura was by his side the entire time. Something changed in him as he lay in that hospital bed. That moment demonstrated how close he was to losing everything, and how he didn't want to waste any more time doing things that could harm his health. He turned to Laura and said, "Guess what? I'm a non-smoker now." Fourth, in 2022, Dan and Laura Dodson nearly lost their son. You would think Dan Dodson was over his worst, with everything he had already been through, including the time he almost died from a brain aneurysm. Unfortunately, there was yet more suffering to come. Due to the fact that they nearly lost their son, Garrett Dodson, this life-threatening event rocked him and his wife Laura in a way that no parent ever wants to experience. Dan had previously experienced another odd and agonizing incident before that, when one of their French bulldogs unexpectedly attacked him and nearly tore off one of his fingers. What transpired in 2020, however, was much more tragic and scary. Their 22-year-old son, Garrett, had gone to Arizona to see his girlfriend, and in a matter of seconds, a terrible incident that occurred during that trip altered everything. Garrett was shot while he was in Arizona, and the damage was horrific. It was a wonder that he could phone for aid on his own. Laura subsequently informed the press that Garrett called 911 despite being severely injured and barely surviving. However, things were rapidly growing worse when he was taken to a local hospital, and the medical staff quickly recognized that they couldn't treat him there. His illness had gotten so bad that they had to act fast and get him to Las Vegas. Laura clarified that the bullet had ripped into Garrett's vena cava, one of his major veins. His insides began to bleed as a result. The situation was so bad that a doctor had to leap onto the operating table and try to stop the bleeding by holding everything together with his hands. In order to keep Garrett alive during the journey to Las Vegas, he continued to massage his heart, and Garrett was still in a pretty vulnerable state when all of this occurred. The medical staff immediately rushed him into surgery as soon as they arrived in Las Vegas. Despite all the odds, the physicians managed to repair the damage and save his life. Later, Dan expressed their gratitude to everyone who joined together that day to save their son's life. They were aware that if one thing had gone wrong, the outcome might have been quite different. A man called Garrett Wilder was eventually taken into custody by the authorities as the culprit behind Garrett's injuries. In addition to other serious accusations, he was charged with 2 counts of aggravated assault and disorderly conduct with a weapon. Third place goes to Brandy Pasante. No one anticipated how quickly Brandy Pasante's reputation would spread when she made her debut in the first season of Storage Wars. Because of her relationship with her partner, Jared Schultz, She became one of the most recognizable faces on the show. In 2014, A&E decided to offer them their own spin-off, which they named Brandy and Jared Married to the Job, because of how naturally they clicked. She gained even more attention as a result of this action. However, there were drawbacks to this dosage of celebrity. In 2020, Brandy opened herself on something she had long suppressed. She talked about how being famous had changed her when she appeared on Danny Jordan's show, The Dad Diary. According to her, things became odd as more people began to recognize her in public. Letters that didn't feel like fan mail began to arrive. Some of them were so unsettling that she began to fear for her children's safety. In order to feel safe, she added, it got so terrible at one point that she had to relocate to a gated neighborhood with round-the-clock protection. Everything that was going on around her began to wear her down, so she had to see a therapist. For a while, she stopped living her normal life because she was afraid to go outside and to be noticed. However, she claimed that with time and assistance, things improved, and she started to feel more like herself. However, this was only the beginning of the awful things that happened to her. Did any other member of the Storage Wars crew have a dreadful near-death experience? Let's investigate. Second place goes to Barry Weiss. Storage Wars was the show that made Barry Weiss famous, despite the fact that before to that, he had never purchased a single storage unit. Tom Beers, one of the producers and someone who had known him for years, helped him get on the show. Barry, however, was different from the majority of the show's participants who aimed to profit from the items they discovered. He simply enjoyed searching for odd and fascinating objects that drew his attention. He occasionally even brought psychics to the auctions to make educated guesses about what might be concealed within the units. And he didn't mind paying for odd things, even if they weren't worth much. With his skeleton gloves, West Coast chopper spectacles, and those crazy cars like the one with a chicken motif he drove to auctions, he made a statement. He stood out from the crowd, which made him popular. As a result, many fans were dissatisfied when he abruptly quit appearing on the show and questioned why. However, Barry and his friend were involved in a horrific motorbike accident in Los Feliz, Los Angeles, around April 2019. They collided with a car head-on, and the impact was so severe that they were sent to the hospital. People were truly concerned about Barry's injuries because they were significantly worse. The only rumors that circulated after the accident were that he had passed away. First, Brandy Pante and Jared Schultz. Now that Storage Wars had begun, everyone was following Jared Schultz and Brandy Pante. They appeared to have it all figured out, and others like how they collaborated and joked together. Even if they have a spin-off called Brandy and Jared, wedded to the job, you my. They never married each other. Nevertheless, they remained together for many years, raising their children and establishing a life centered around thrift stores and auctions. But things began to alter over time. Their partnership ended in 2021. In the first episode of Season 13, they made it clear. They continued to film the show together, even though they were no longer a couple. After the breakup, everything between them first appeared to be going well. Many believed they had simply moved on and were merely attempting to keep things professional for the cameras, and there were no significant public altercations. However, something occurred in May 2021 that altered everyone's perception of the situation. Jared was charged with domestic assault against Brandy, according to TMZ. According to the account, they met at an Orange County bar. Things became uncomfortable when Jared arrived while Brandy was out with some friends. He allegedly refused her repeated requests for him to leave. Subsequently, It intensified and reportedly became physical. Fans were further perplexed by Jared's silence and lack of response during the spread of this information. They were unsure about what to think. Before Brandy shared something on Instagram, all they had were headlines and educated speculations. She displayed a tattoo that read "Free," and beneath it, she made a powerful statement without specifically naming anyone. She clarified that the tattoo signified that she had made it through a potentially devastating experience. She expressed how fortunate she felt to have survived a difficult circumstance from which many others never managed to leave. She also expressed gratitude for the sense of security and tranquility she had. Which person's loss affected you the most after hearing these tales? And do you think people who suspect this show's backstage plot are telling the truth? Leave a comment with your ideas. Please like, share, and subscribe to this channel if you liked this video. Examine the other videos on your screen before leaving.